A very warm good morning to all our students. Uh, the MA final year, Karnataka State Open University, Department of English. A very good morning to you all, Saraswati and Ahmed. Some of you are here on the line. See, this is the third day session. So far, we have discussed other literary texts. I think by now you have an idea how literary texts are placed. For example, in the first paper, 20th century English literature, where you have studied a text confined to our 21st century, the new, with a different concept, the Sons and Lovers, and you understood the how psychological themes and the human complications, the mental and mentally, physically, and Oedipus complex, and other themes. There is the materialistic, the money and family bondage, and all intricate concept that you have studied. And another facet, when you've gone through the second paper, the comparative literature, a way you have studied, other important, the popular experimentations like alienation effect, and how the action takes place in all epic theaters and alienation effect, and the distinction between Shakespearean theater, Elizabethan theater, and Abbey theater, and then of course Elizabethan and Shakespeare are one of the same, and you understood the entire the forms of drama and how they evolved, the nitty-gritties of plays and all that. And in the third paper, today we are going to study another major distinct area of study, that is a literary criticism. A literary criticism is a paper where you come across many critics, literary theoreticians, literary. They are, for example, you have some other poets. For example, the entire paper, like Aristotle's Poetics, Longinus Sublimity on the Sublime, and then Dryden, an essay of dramatic poesy, and Wordsworth, the preface to the lyrical ballads, and the Coleridge, and Matthew Arnold, Henry James, Eliot, F.R. Lewis, Higher Richards, practical criticism, and then deconstruction and feminist theory. And after that, you have a contemporary postmodern until post-colonial theory. And for example, if Aristotle and other till F.R. Lewis, in case if they talk on, they put the views, criticism on critical viewpoints on poetry, novel, drama, fiction, and so on and so forth. But after that, in Black 4 onwards, where you have A. Richards, practical criticism, deconstruction, it is something to do more on language and how language plays an important role, how language plays a pivotal role in literature. So these the second facets, the second phase, where you have a theories completely talking about the importance of language, and how to interpret language in a literary text. But in the early Aristotle till Lewis, we have to come across his own views on criticism, on literature. Otherwise, how one person, put his views on another writer. So the interpretations, that we come across in this paper, and the understand it's a literary criticism. What we call in Kannada the vimarshe in the sense like putting your interpretations on a literary text. So here there is a writer, a critic, who is known for his critical documentation, critical treatise, treatise in the sense putting your comments and viewpoints. What kind of critical viewpoints? They are validated points. They are judiciously put forth, judiciously, expressing the viewpoints, the interpretations. We have a writer called Aristotle. Aristotle, he's a great philosopher. You all know that. He's a Greek philosopher. When we talk about the Greek theater, the Greek literature, the two texts come into picture. For example, Oedipus Rex and Agamemnon, the famous classics in the world Greek literature. Today, we are making use of a character called Oedipus, from the play, Oedipus Rex, and where Oedipus himself is one of the best tragic hero according to Aristotle, and how he has his own qualities. He called him as an ideal tragic hero. According to Aristotle, Oedipus Rex is an ideal tragic hero. This you should keep it in your mind. This is one thing. And if you the whole see the entire session, I'm going to be talking about what actually what do you mean by the poetics is all about. What is the poetics, and what are the functions of this the poetics, and what is it talking about? And keep in your mind. I must tell you one thing. Before I get into this criticism called poetics, probably all of you might have come across about this text when you write your assignments. Of course, all of you have written your assignments and you have submitted to us, and we have gone through and assessed and all that. The process is done. What I'm saying here, what made Aristotle to write these poetics? All of you should be very careful to understand this. But I told you this is a criticism, and where he his own opinion. He puts his opinion, remarks on some other issues. What is that issue? There is a very serious issue here. The purpose of writing the poetics. There is a purpose. There is the great ideology. There is a great important component to write the poetics from Aristotle. So then, what made Aristotle to write these poetics? This background is important. Of course, you have your notes and you read and what he deals in his poetics, and you write your exam and you score your marks. But there is also a purpose behind every text. What mattered a writer to write such a text? So here, Aristotle, he wrote this text because he could not withstand, he couldn't control, he couldn't even bear, he couldn't simply keep quiet for some ideas, for some criticism, for some ideologies, for some interpretation made by his own teacher called Plato. And when we talk about Plato, the one thing which comes to our mind is the Plato is known for his the great literary text called. Can anyone guess the Plato's important literary text? He wrote a text called Republic. So Plato's Republic and Aristotle's Poetics, they're the great literary text when we're talking about literary criticism. There is interconnection with Plato's Republic and Aristotle's Poetics. So what is the connection? What is this kind? What is there is a lot of distinction. What is the distinction? What made Aristotle to write his Poetics, and how he attacking Plato's words in Republic? Then what Plato did in Republic? Certainly, if Aristotle is going to against his own teacher, yes, of course, Plato was his teacher. He's also another the Greek philosopher. He's a mentor. He's a guide, and he's a teacher to Aristotle. Aristotle is his pupil. Is his student. And though he's the student of Plato, Aristotle, he did not keep quiet, because then Plato might have done something wrong. So Plato would have written something wrong, probably which against the notions of Aristotle. Then what Plato did? Remember, what led Aristotle to write his Poetics? Because of what Plato wrote it in Republic. He is going to give a counterpart. He is going to against his teacher's idea. So Plato did it in in his Republic, saying that talking about the poets, he said that poets are the liars. The poets, they are the myth creator. In poetry, you could only see lies. In poetry, you can only see the imitation. There is no recreation. Yesterday we're talking about the artistic portrayal, the artistic imagination, the artistic truth in it. It is missing. So poetry, it is a result of some myth, some lie. There is no truth in it, because it only deals with imaginations and fancy and other. The words are completely realistic. They're not completely realistic. I think because poets, they copy from someone and place before their writings. It is completely copied. So we understood that Plato, he made an allegation, he attacked poets and the poetry. He called poets as a liar. They're the myth creator. They are not supposed to be in the world of ideal place. So let us banish all the poets from the ideal world called poetry. From the ideal world. Because there are many poets. The great poets are there. So Plato, he banished all the poets from the ideal world. ಒಂದು ಆದರ್ಶ ಜಗತ್ತು ಅನ್ನೋ ಒಂದು ಪ್ರಪಂಚದಲ್ಲಿ ಈ ಪಾಯಿಂಟ್ಸ್ಗಳು ಇರಬಾರದು. ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ಅವ್ರು ಹೇಳುವುದೆಲ್ಲ ಬರೀ ಮಿತ್, ಸುಳ್ಳಿರುತ್ತೆ. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ನೈಜತೆ ಇರಲ್ಲ. There is no creativity in it. The artistic process is missing. So so Plato did this allegation in his Republic. You got the point? So Aristotle, he couldn't keep quiet, and he has to revert. He has to reply to his teacher. He has to say that he has to defend poetry and poets. So we have to come across in this text the poetics saying that, and how Aristotle he defends, he made a defense, he made an assessment, and he proved that the poetry it is not the result of myth or a lies. It is a something called recreation. There is an artistic process. For example, when you take there is an artistic depiction, there is artistic creativity, imagination. So I don't accept if Plato calls poets are the myth creator, they're the liars. They're supposed to be in the ideal world. I think the best place for the poets is to be in the ideal world. ಒಂದು ಆದರ್ಶ ಜಗತ್ತಲ್ಲಿ ಅವ್ರು ಇರಬೇಕು. If you ask, like, Shilparani Malavali. So why did he thought? Why did he think? Or why did he thought is a wrong phrase? You're using double past tense word. So why did he think so? Yes, because they have their own opinion to put forth. Probably he understood that some poetry, there, for example, when you read a poem like, there are many poets, you think that yes, there is no reality, there is something imagination. They don't instruct the reader, they don't give some message, there is no constructive ideologies. See this concept called a constructive ideologies, which is very much judicious in terms of instructing the audience, instructing society, instructing readers. So that is missing. That's what he says. But Aristotle, he is going to defend his own teacher, saying that no, I don't agree what you say. Then he has to prove it. When Aristotle proves it, he made it. For example, he talks about the different literary texts, the different literary genre. What do we call ಸಾಹಿತ್ಯದ ಪ್ರಕಾರಗಳು ಅಂತ ಕರಿತೀವಿ. We call literature is literature. Of course, it's a one word. It is an inclusive entity which covers poetry, drama, fiction, novel, plays, whatnot. It covers everything. Come under literature. So here, the Sahitya, the Prakaragulu, what we call as a genre. So here, Aristotle, he says that in his poetics, he talks about the epic. He talks about the poetry. He talks about the plays. He talks about the tragedy. He talks about the comedy, and he talks about all kind of the genre, literary genre. And he thinks that the drama, it is the highest form of the poetry. And he put forth the tragedy, a play, especially a play, as an highest form of artistic, entity. For example, a famous 20th century literary critic, they say, the Hamlet, it is a paid drama, but it has its own literary poetic aesthetics. The lines of a Hamlet, yes, the Hamlet written by Shakespeare. So that play, though it's a play, they call it as a poetry because the lines of the poetry, it is almost like they have its own metaphorical, they have its own the poetic imagination, the poetic aesthetics, the poetic nuances. The dialogues are appear more like a poetry. So Aristotle, he says that I'm not connecting Aristotle in the play Hamlet to poetics. It's my own interpretation because Aristotle says that a play, especially a tragedy, it is also in the form of a poetry. Getting my point? So my observation and other poets' observation, critics' observation, saying that even a play like Hamlet, it is in the form of a poetry. There is a lot of poetry in it than mere dialogue because Hamlet's frequent line, to be or not to be, and the repetitive lines, it's much more like a poetical in nature, the poetry in nature. So he talking about see, this is what the criticism all about. In criticism, you cannot expect a story like yesterday you come across like six characters in search of an author, otherwise a novel, such a novels, where you have your own imaginative mind set up and you listen to stories. But whereas here in this platform, criticism, these are the views. He's against his own teacher, and he has to prove that yes, poetry. He calls play, especially a tragedy, is also a poetry. Then, when there is a lot of action takes place in the drama, because a character he undergoes from adversity to prosperity, from then to here, the action plays a very important role. Where there is a lot of action, how he can perform, because of his own talent, artistic talent. So when there is a talent, then how do you call it as a as a it's a completely imagination. There is not there is something not originality. What do you call there is no originality? Because a play is also poetry. You can't confine yourself. Poetry is supposed to be like this. Even a play can also be a tragedy. The play can also be a tragedy can also be filled with lots of originality, a creation, a recreation, a truth, and everything. And he takes this concept called a tragedy in his poetics. He talks about the concept of tragedy. Entire the part of the text covers what actually tragedy, the functions of tragedy, and how the tragedy plays an important role in a poetics. So in the remaining entire 45 minutes possible, I try to give you the entire form in a nutshell. Okay, and now let me come back to this text, the poetics, and let me try to give you this text in a nutshell form, and it really helps you for your examination, and you're able to okay, and you're able to as much as possible try to understand the text. See, the first I'm going to be talking about this concept called what is a tragedy. We'll throw a light on what is tragedy first, because so far my description, so far my narration, so far my explanation, and the background of the text, what made poetics, what made Aristotle to write this poetry. Are you able to follow me? Are you getting my point? Are you making any sense out of it? You're getting right. Hope I believe that you are in the streamline and you are able to follow me carefully, and you understand the nitty gritty of this criticism. And here Aristotle is not just merely defending himself, but rather he's applying his judicious comments, judicious criticism, the way people can say, yes, you're true. A poetry, a tragedy can also be a poetry because in the form of a language. So there is a lot of recreation, there is an action. So when there is an action, when one will have his own talent to perform, then how do you call it as a imitation? He used a word called mimesis. He uses many Greek terminologies. Let me tell you right away the Greek terminologies that he refers in poetics. For example, we have one word called in poetry. I mean, in especially this poetics, he uses quite a few number of you know, you know, I mean, the words of which are very popular. For example, mimesis. So what do you mean by mimesis? Mimesis we have explained in your notes, and please you go to there. Mimesis in the sense imitation. So Plato says that poets are the imitators. Poetry it is just an imitation. But Aristotle is saying that it is not a imitation, but it is an imitation of an action. Though they observe someone, they have their own genuine qualities to perform. So poetry it is not just an imitation. They are not just imitators. It's an imitation. They're the imitators of an action. There is an artistic entity in that. So he is going to prove that. So mimesis is an imitation, and we have a concept called amartia. Amartia in the sense a tragic flaw. Hamartia, an error of judgment. For example, when talking about for every instances, I should bring Oedipus Rex, the play, to make you understand the text. So, according to him, the best tragedy is Oedipus Rex, the Greek play. And when he talked about the amartia, a tragic flaw, Oedipus Rex is a tragic flaw. He has an amartia. What is an amartia? Could be what is the error of judgment. So I'll just describe while I teach you. So amartia means a tragic flaw. He has his own weakness. For example, Macbeth and the amartia was like he was over ambitious. King Lear was credulous. He easily believed people. So everyone has their own tragic flaw. They have their own amartia, the error of judgment. So here, Oedipus Rex, I told you yesterday that he kills his father, Laius, unknowingly, and he married his own mother. And a fine day, he understood the truth. When the entire country suffered from plague disease, and he called Tiresias, a predictor, the one who prophesies things, what happens in the future. And he told because of something had happened, the incest had taken place, and even Oedipus Rex, he couldn't believe that. And eventually, the fact end of the play, he understood he's the one who kills his father and married his own mother. Getting my point? And after that, he plucks his eyes. And so Oedipus Rex has all the qualities. He has all the elements that an ideal tragic hero must have. So he's called as an ideal tragic hero because he commits some mistake without knowing himself, for which he called as anagnosis. That the discovery, recognition. He understood what problem that he committed, what mistake he did it. So this is anagnosis, and we have catharsis. Catharsis in the sense the fear of pity and fear. He has that the purgation in him, the pity of fear. When you read his tragic plight, when you come across his tragic plight, you feel so. He's the one who has the ability to create a pity and fear in the mind of an audience. So he has that qualities in it. And there is another term called peripetia. Peripetia, it is in the is a turning point of an action. There is some point where a plot takes place, a sudden reversal. That's called as peripetia. These are all, and we have another one word called denouement, which means the spelling is different. Denoement. Denouement, in the sense like the final outcome of a text, the final outcome of a text which leads to a climax with a lot of complexities. And all these terms are explained very well in your notes. You kindly go through. I just wanted to emphasize on these terms because these terms plays an important role in the text. So I told you an ideal tragic hero is Oedipus Rex because he fulfills all the qualities what a tragic hero should have. For example, my analysis, like coming back to the analysis of this the poetics, the first I talk about what actually is tragedies. What is tragedy? You can also take down then and there, which are the important component are there in this text. One is what is tragedy, and the aim of a tragedy, and the functions of a tragedy, and who is a tragic hero, and the what do you mean by plot? The plot will have two component: the simple plot and the complex plot. And he talks about six elements in a tragedy. A tragedy will have six elements. For example, they are plot, character, thought, diction, the melody, and the spectacle. That I'll tell you further. And after that, I'll talk about the simple and complex plot and the three unities. According to Aristotle, a tragedy should have a three unities of a time, place, and action. So I repeat again, the entire lecture will cover what is tragedy, the aim of tragedy, and functions of tragedy, and who is an ideal tragic hero, and the plot, simple and complex plot, and then the three unities. And these are the four, seven important components that I discuss here. So further, I come back to the text. See, I told you, according to Aristotle, the tragedy. So what do you mean by tragedy? The tragedy is an imitation of an action. According to him, a tragedy is an imitation of an action. The line goes even furthermore. So there is a definition according to Aristotle. So now I'm going to discuss about the tragedy first. So what actually tragedy according to Aristotle? The definition is given over there in your study material. I repeat it again from the text. According to Aristotle, the definition of a tragedy is says a tragedy is the imitation of an action. So the word action is important. That is serious, complete, it will have a completeness, and of a magnitude. Of what magnitude? Certain magnitude, a complete in itself. So according to him, a tragedy is the imitation of an action that is serious, complete, and of a certain magnitude. So I tell you further, what is this imitation? What is this complete? And what is this magnitude? And while I describe a text. So the aim of a tragedy. So what is the aim of a tragedy? A tragedy should arise a pity and fear in the mind of an audience. For example, after you watch Oedipus Rex play, after you watched it, after the audience completely come across, the plight of us, Oedipus Rex, the way he performed, the way his sufferings, the way his journey from adversity from prosperity, so from prosperity to adversity, and you feel a pity and fear. You get really scared. You feel pity towards him. So that we come across here, and that is the definitions of a tragedy. So now coming back to the text. So tragedy indeed is a major concern of a poetics. I repeat it again. The entire poetics, the term tragedy takes a pivotal role, and tragedy is considered by Aristotle to be the highest poetic form. I repeat, keep this your line. I mean, keep. You can just take down this line that tragedy is considered by Aristotle to be the highest poetic form. Not even poetry, not even epic, not even narrative poetry, and not even any form of poetry. I think the tragedy, a play, especially a tragic play, a tragedy, it is in the highest form of a poetic form. It is not just mere a play; it is a poetry. How could be in terms of its the action, could be in terms of its the function, the way a tragedy will have its artistic portrayal, the poetic depiction, and then his definition and theory of tragedy presents in this text a very remarkably and insightful, and it has become the type of theory of literature. And today, when we're talking about literary theory and criticism, and even Aristotle poetics became a genesis, become inception, which laid the foreground, which laid the boundary, which laid the basic foundation for criticism. So I say here, the Aristotle poetics, it makes a foundation for the further literary theories. Further, it led it paved the way for further criticism, as I told you, for example, Dryden, Matthew Arnold, F.R. Lewis, T.S. Eliot, and S.T. Coleridge, and Philip Sidney, and many other literary critics. They have they influence deeply, and they develop their own theoretical approach. And you probably the teachers of our department, faculty of English department, probably in this they may also come and teach you the many texts from and this literary criticism. So this is one thing I told. The tragedy is considered by Aristotle to be the highest poetic form. Okay, and after that, Aristotle he say that the tragedy is considered. So I have my own explanation here. I've made some points and I made which really help you for your examination, and you very carefully and very scrupulously, I mean very much carefully just listen, and then and there you can take some points, and that helps you to read the text further. Okay, and the second important idea or the important concept that I'm talking about, the tragedy is considered by Aristotle to be a highest form than the heroic or epic form of a poetry. I don't even call narrative poetry or a epic or a poetry as the highest form. I think tragedy is the best among all, and tragedy is considered as the best. It is the highest poetic form. And after that, he talks about how tragedy it differs from comedy, how it differs from other comedy manners or comedy plays and all that. And he says that comedy it is just imitation, a grotesque action. In the comedy you can come across imitation, but not in a tragedy. The tragedy it is just built on what he says, that is action, because a tragedy represents the life through acting. In tragedy you understand the life exactly, how life depicted in how life it is there in actual life. The same thing to be depicted in the poetry. The action is important. There is no superfluity, there is no superfluous language, there is no life, there is no something beyond imagination. Here it is something to be original, something to be genuine. So it says that a tragedy it represents the life through acting. It differed from other forms of poetry in that it employs an embellishment. There is a true nature. And he said that when you talk about the tragedy, I told you tragedy it is an imitation of an action. So what kind of action? It must have a complete beginning, middle, and an end. A tragedy will have a completeness. Only the complete in an action. How? Because a tragedy will have a beginning, will have a middle, and an end. And as I told you as well, it will have unities of time, place, and action. It also gives your oneness. It also gives a completeness. So according to him, a tragedy, an action is incomplete because it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And after that he talks about there are other concept called, I told you there are six elements in a tragedy. That is what are they, which are they? They are I told you, first is a plot, a character, thought, diction, melody, and spectacle. For example, plot, there are two plots. There's a simple plot and the complex plot. In the complex plot, we can come across only in tragedy. The tragedy will have a complex plot because there are a lot of incidents, which take place. Whereas a comedy, they are just a simple plot because there is not lot more twist and turns. And he talked about another concept called selections of a characters. Who can be an ideal tragic hero? So he talks about the character and the thought, because language become a very important, and then diction is a language, and the thoughts, and how language and the words become important. And after that, a tragedy will have a melody, the song. It will have a song, and after that, the spectacle in the sense audience. So all these six important ingredients, elements, gives a completeness to a complete picture, to a tragedy. That's what he says that. And after that, he says that one important concept that there are two plot in a tragedy. Okay, the simple plot and a complex plot. And what does he say about the simple plot? I tell you that he talking about he says that the plot is the soul of a tragedy. Aristotle says in the most important aspect of a tragedy, that the is a plot. So the plot is the soul of a tragedy. So I repeat it again. Take this point because the plot, what do you say in Kannada? The Katha, the subject matter. The plot is a soul of a tragedy. So he differentiate two important things. And first, he talks about the simple plot. In the simple plot, there is a continuous movement, okay, and involve no violent, no changes. There'll be no violence. There is no the kind of horror. There is nothing. The issue is very simple. It leads to the action immediately in the simple plot. And he talks about the complex plot. I told you he talking about the plot in the beginning, and where he just spoke about I just spoke about the simple plot, and now he's talking about the complex plot. In the complex plot, it involved changes arising out of peripetia and anagnosis. In the complex plot, as I told you, these terms like peripetia, which means I told you it is a tragic hero. There is a turning point, the way he understood the truth. That is called as anagnosis. He has his own tragic flaw. He has his own, he doesn't know what is his problem. Afraid, okay, and it was excessive reasoning. See the amartia, the tragic flaw of Oedipus Rex is excessive reasoning. He just want to dig the information, what happened, and why the entire country suffered from plague disease. So his excessive reasoning become that is one point of time he understood the recognition. Anagnos in the sense that we didn't know the truth. A fine day he understood the truth, and a peripetia. After he understood, his mistake, and there is a sudden turning point. What is that? So the peripetia. He turns his eyes, and because he can't see the mother that he married after killing his father unknowingly. And please, you read Oedipus Rex play. Possible, I try to teach you in a nutshell. You on the last, otherwise, tomorrow or some other classes too. Because one who knows this text completely will be able to understand the poetics. So he says that the complex plot will involve with this peripetia, the turning point, and anagnosis, where the character he doesn't know what is his problem is, and finally he understands that this kind of a muddleness, confusionness, and our confusion. After that he understands the truth, and there is the kind of the purification. Yes, and he precise, and he there is a he punishes himself. So these are a lot of complexity that we come across in complex plot, and he says that complex plot it is there in a tragedy. So the turns into a complex plot, it is emphasized must arise out of structures of the plot. And I know he talked about the peripetia. Let me emphasize, the peripetia and anagnosis in complex plot. Peripetia, which also means a reversal, a reversal where he in the change in the fortune of the hero. Okay, and the change reversal in the situation is brought about by human actions. I told you, yes, he understands his mistake, and recognition in the sense like a recognition. He understands where he did the mistakes and all that. And after that, he talks about. the unities of, I mean, he talks about character, that I tell you further. Much before that, he talks about, this the three unities. How three unities are there in a tragedy? Which are they? First, he talks about Aristotle wrote Poetics, an analysis of the extent the practice in the dramatist's heart. He says that he emphasizes on that, he stresses on that a tragedy will have a unity of action. So what do you mean by action? That the action of a tragedy should be logical, a sequence, and coherent whole, directed toward a single end and towards its end. For example, he says that action means there is action in a tragedy should will have a logical, a sequence, and coherence. The action, as I told you, there should be a beginning, there should be a middle, and there is an end, according to him. That is unity of action. Then what do you mean by unities of time? And Aristotle, he puts his observation in a tragedy, unities of time in the sense it has its own time bound. For example, you say that 24 hours, within a day, it has its own time bound. A tragedy must have a units of time. It should start in a point and it should end within the 24 hours, within a day, with the stipulated time bound. So, for example, a tragedy should never go for a long time. It shouldn't, for example, William Shakespeare's plays will never have these unities of time and place, only action, because all the characters under the hands of William Shakespeare. That's called as character is destiny, where the character they have their own follies, they have their own mistake, and they led their own destiny. Whereas the Greek plays, it is a destiny's character, because the chorus himself knows what will happen to the writer, what will happen to the character. Getting my point? So that come under in the Greek tragedies, the destiny's character, where the destiny takes a very important role. It dominates the character. Everything is a predetermined, and then predestined rather. Everything is predestined. And whereas in the Shakespearean tragedies, the character they lay the tragic death because of their own mistake. So here, why did I say so? Because with Shakespearean plays, they don't have these unities of time and place, only action, because he uses characters so much and did not put any observations on them. So here we say that unities of time is a very important, because Aristotle he believes that in tragedy a limit to the time or a single revolution of within 24 hours, within time bound. A tragedy should have a time bound. And then unities of place. He says that there should also be, for example, place is not more important than a time and action. But even then, the unities of time is also very important, but he doesn't stress more on that. So, according to Aristotle, these times unities of time, place, and action are very important, and he talks about the character now. So he talks about the four essential or enumerated by Aristotle for successful characterization in a tragedy. Who can be an ideal tragic hero? We say that tragic hero is Oedipus Rex is an ideal tragic hero. But what are the qualities? Whom do we call as an ideal tragic hero? Okay, and are you able to make any sense out of it? Are you getting the narration? Are you getting this criticism and how he's put forth his viewpoint, how he demonstrate his observations here? For example, according to Aristotle, an ideal tragic hero must have some qualities. He says that Aristotle has laid down the four important rules about the selections of a tragic hero. Who can be an ideal tragic hero? The point number one. Listen, he must not be a man who is very good. He must not be a man who is very good, but who suffers in life and undergoes a change from prosperity to adversity. From prosperity, he was so prosperous in the beginning and gradually led to adversity. You're getting my point? So the first point is he must not be a man who is very good. He need not to be a very good person. He should be a man who suffers in life and undergoes change from prosperity to adversity. And then he must not be a man who is totally bad. not totally good, not totally bad, and who undergoes a change of from adversity to prosperity. It should not also be the same. It shouldn't be too bad. Who start his, who start his changes from, who undergoes from adversity to prosperity. Then he must not be a villain. Then what? He should be a man who is not extremely good, but a man who makes some mistake. He has some tragic flaw. He should have some hamartia. Hamartia in the sense the tragic flaw. And who makes some mistake, not because of vice, but only through some sort of mistakes. Therefore, a suffer in his life, and such man alone arises the pity and fear in the minds of the spectator. What does he say? Eventually, a tragic hero, he should start his journey from prosperity to adversity, and he should be a man who, he's able to do some mistake, able to commit some mistake. He should not be an ideal person who is always, perfect in his action. And he say that an ideal tragic hero is the one, who start his journey from, and who is the man who is able to commit some mistake. And that's the reason why I told these words. Like he's the one, the catharsis, who can create the pity and fear in the mind of an audience. Of course, when we look at Oedipus Rex, we get that feelings. So the term catharsis, the pity and fear, the term amartia, a tragic flaw, the peripetia, anagnosis, all these are the terms which are associated with the Greek tragedies. And he says that an ideal tragic hero should not be a perfectly good, not utterly depraved, utterly bad. He should be a man not preeminently good and just, yet whose misfortune is brought about not by his vice, not by his depravity, but some error of judgment. The man who is able to commit some mistake, and he must be the one who is highly renowned and and prosperous, and he's able to commit some mistakes. So, thus, an ideal tragic hero should be a mixture of virtue and a human frailty. Remember, he's a man of virtue and he's a man of the human frailty. Okay, and then his misfortune should come about from an error of judgment. While erring, because I told you, though the Tiresias comes and tells him, this is the reason why the country suffered from plague disease, and that he's a real culprit. He's the reason behind, but he doesn't want to believe that. He wants to know even furthermore. So that is the ideal tragic hero. The Oedipus Rex problem itself is excessive reasoning, and he that is called as a dramatic irony, where the character he doesn't even know that he's a real culprit and he's the one, the reason behind, but still he want to dig the information who might have done all that. So the dramatic irony, it is very much applicable to Oedipus Rex, the king, and his misfortune should be come from an error of judgment. He is a man who is has some quality to do some mistake. ಹೌದು, ಅವನು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ತಪ್ಪುಗಳನ್ನ ಮಾಡಲೇಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ. An ideal tragic hero, he will have some problem. He has some error of judgment. He couldn't judge the situation properly. That means he is able to do some mistake. He should commit some mistake, otherwise it won't be called as a tragedy. Otherwise there won't be no a series of action, as I told you. And then and after that, after he's talking about the ideal tragic hero, and what happens. So the conflict between the conflict between other the good and evil that you come across in a tragedies. So here, that's what he talks about. For example, and he tells that, when we talk about the tragedy, other like I told you, like the thought, melody, spectacle, in the sense, all of them gives a completeness, a complete picture to a tragedy, according to him. So according to Aristotle, as I told you, there are two kinds of plot. Let me emphasize even more on that. The one is called the simple plot, and another one is called a complex plot. So in the simple plot, I told you, the hero's fortune, it passes directly from happiness to misery. Whereas in the complex plot, I mean, I told you there is no discovery in the simple plot. Whereas in the complex plot, the incident go on rising until they reach the climax. What is the climax in the Greek term called dinauma? Don't pronounce it as a denouement, it's a denoma. But the spellings is like this. The spelling is entirely different. Let me spell out, this written here somewhere. So the spelling is Denouement, denoma, which means kind of, climax, and where a tragic hero he understands his own problem. And after that, I told you this this complex plot. Here he undergoes with prosperity to adversity, and other thing, and happiness and all that. And there is no discovery in the simple plot. To talk about simple plot, there is no discover because the actions takes place easily. In the complex plot, I told you, the incident go on rising until they reach the climax, and the turning point, the where a discovery and has been made by the hero and about his real situation. And then the miseries follow very quickly, and then that includes the complex plot. So complex plot, it needs a more skill. So the selection of an ideal tragic hero is important. The man who has all this ideologies, all this concept, and so that leads to a betterment. So coming back to another important concept, Aristotle, he points out the I told you the Greek terminologies, for example, hamartia, mimesis, anagnosis, peripetia, and denomo. All are very important, and you just go through in your study material, and you will certainly understand even more important concept. For example, so this is the one where the Aristotle he talks about in his tragedy. That's a poetics. So now, coming back to see, so far I have described all these concepts. For example, the entire poetics, which covers the five important elements. To repeat it further again, for example, poetics, which talks about the plot, which has six elements. The plot, and the plot will have a two component. One is simple, another one complex. And after that, he talks about in the simple plot how the action takes place without any sudden reversal and all that. And the complex plot will have a lot of twists and turns. And after that, the character is an ideal tragic hero. And I also told you the what are the qualities of an ideal tragic hero. Okay. And after that, you have for example, you have a thought, and because the thoughts are there in the tragic hero's mind, and how the thoughts will reverberate. The thoughts will come out using of dictions and the words, and it also gives a complete picture to a tragedy. And you have a melody. The songs are important. The songs is also part and parcel of a tragedy. And then you have a spectacle, because spectacles are important. Spectacles are very important because they're the one who create who express their the pity and fear, because they're the one who express they feel so sorry about the character. So so far I have described this text, the poetics. I told you this laid the foundation for what is called as criticism. I also emphasize on which are the other critics like Aristotle, and Matthew Arnold, and Dryden, Philip Sidney, and other Wordsworth, and a T.S. Eliot, and a Carl Lewis, and other further literally critics who talks about this treatise called criticism is all about. And now I'll give you 1 minute in case if you have any doubts that you want to ask me, you can ask, and so that I just try to answer your questions. And now, after that, I described how he against his own teacher called Plato, because I told you Plato, he is the one who banished all the poets in the idealized world because they're not fitted to be there. But it is a reaction against his own teacher, the Plato. And Aristotle. He proved with all these components, with all these tragical elements, with all these nuances, with all these aesthetics of a tragedy, like plot, character, and thoughts, a spectacle, melody, and diction, and all that. We can find a theory. Art itself as its own artistic imagination, artistic process, an artistic entity. Then how do you call a tragedy is just a mimesis? How do you call a tragedy just an imitation? But it is not an imitation, but it is a recreation. But it's a recreation of something like that. And I must also tell you, because in the syllabus, I just taught you in this entire 50 minutes about the role of literary theory, I mean literary criticism of Aristotle. Uh, and after that, for example, let me just throw a light on a certain concept called other literary critic that you are going to study in this paper. That's a literary criticism. For example, I told you criticism, it is something which, exchange of words, is exchange of interpretations from one writer to another that we come across. And after that, you have the Dryden essay, an essay of dramatic poesy, and where he also talks about the different nuances of poetry, the forms of poetry, and the role of a poet. And you have a Wordsworth, a very great literary treatise. We call it as a treatise, a dictum, the literary treatise called, a preface to lyrical ballads. And the way again, Aristotle, I mean, the Wordsworth, he talks about the language, the diction, or language of a poem, and whom do we call as a poet? What is the role of a poet, and how he made his assessment again on the poetry and the poet and further, and even in Coleridge's biography literary as well, and how the language which differed from Wordsworth to Coleridge. For example, if Wordsworth talking about a common diction, simple language, and which applicable to each and everyone, which are very much applicable to each and everyone, and whereas Coleridge's language is entirely different because his language is but his notion called the willingly suspension of disbelief, and using the complex words like which are completely imagination based, and the fictional words, and he talks about the fancy imagination, and in that mode, in that sense, he speaks over there. And you have the Matthew Arnold, another criticism, famous criticism called the study of poetry. In the study of poetry, and where he talks about this notion called a touchstone, the touchstone method. Probably in the exam there'll be a question on talking about you define the touchstone method according to the Matthew Arnold. So Matthew Arnold, a touchstone method in the sense every poet like Chaucer and other contemporaries and other poets, they will have some the validated judicious criticism, judicious interpretation they put forth. How to identify that the sublime in literary words, sublime in a literary word, how the language plays an important role, how the poetic diction. So all of things we talk about in the study of poetry, and where he emphasizes on a touchstone method to understand the grandeur in thought, the sublimity of a language. Especially he emphasizes on the Chaucer's language, the Geoffrey Chaucer language, though it was written in 14th century, how he completely throws a light on the entire, the 14th century life with a realistic depiction, and he talks about all sectors of society, and he and how we can understand the study of poetry, especially in concern to the touchstone method. And you have Henry James, the heart of fiction, and where he talks about the recent, because Henry James is a 20th century critic, and where he talks about the fiction, because fiction is a part and parcel of a novel. Fiction, we can call it as a fiction only in terms of in the modern sense, and the way the novel has its own the grand narrative style. It has a lengthy literary form, literary text, but the fiction can also be called as a tiny text, where he talks about the modern the gadgets, modern invention, the modern technologies. For example, if we have a science fiction, we have pulp fiction, we have the graphic, and we have a fantasy based story, Holocaust fiction, and where Henry James talking about the use of different the use of methods. For example, we have use of language, use of the form and all that. And T.S. Eliot's another essay that you are going to study here, the other faculty will teach you, that is tradition and individual talent, where where he talked about how the past and how a historical sense it helps to a writer, it helps to a poet to have his own individual talent. Again, he talks about the artistic process, and where he talks about the tradition and the talent, they go hand in hand, because they shouldn't forget the present. It is followed by the past. There is a logical connection. There is a connection with the past and the present. In the same way, with a tradition as well as to the a poet. So there is a recreation. There is a genuine quality in him. So here, where this writer, that's a T.S. Eliot, he talks about the value of tradition and how even the Shakespeare, he derived the quality from Plutarch, his predecessor, and he talks about the Homer, he talks about the Chaucer language, and how the tradition it becomes a very important in a text, especially tradition and the individual talent, where he talks about objective correlative, and he talks about the disassociation of sensibilities, and he talks about the role of a critic. The teacher will teach you the text in an analysis phase, a complete text. And after that, we have F.R. Lewis' text, that is literature and sociology, and where this is influenced by other his first text called Common Pursuit, and where F.R. Lewis, a 20th century critic, talk about and how society and literature and sociology, they are one and the same. They go hand in hand. Whatever the society captures, whatever the society is, it is reflects in a literature, And he talks about a concept called historian, and who can be called as a great novelist, who can be a great historian. And he says that there is one writer called G.M. Trevelyan. He's a German philosopher, he's a German novelist. And F.R. Lewis says that the German novelist called G.M. Trevelyan, he is a true novelist because he's a historian. A novelist should be a historian more than a novelist. How he can be a historian? Because he should reread the history, because the history is very important. We can't leave the history aside and to lead our life, because history plays a very important role, and in order to lead our life, that then it gives a completeness to the life, complete meaning to the life. So he says that the literature and society, and they go hand in hand, and that concept. And of course, we have I.A. Richards, these two uses of language, where he talks about that the poetry will have, language will have in a two way. One is the poetry, the scientific language, and emotive language. But the emotive language, in the sense, a language which is easily applicable to other people. Some novels, some poetry, some texts are written in this scientific language and empathic language. Empathic language, in the sense that it is easily applicable to the reader. Reader easily understands. Like for example, the Wordsworth in poetry, and there are poetry which is completely unscientific. For example, the modern. For example, we have poets like American poets like Ezra Pound. The way he uses, the modern technique. For example, Japanese haiku style, using a language, using just two lines of a poem, and he gives a title called "In a Station of Metro." So the modern scientific language, and they do not follow the pattern of a poetry. They do have just a free verse. For example, we have a Wasteland of T.S. Eliot, where he wrote in a free verse form, where he doesn't follow the metrical arrangement, where he doesn't follow the poetic form. So I hear Richard talking about how poetry has a different language, the different structure in it, and practical criticism, and where you'll be given an unseen poem, you'll give you a poem, and where you need to understand, for example, for example, the feelings, and the intention, and the tone, and imageries, and then for example, sense, images, the words, everything. You need to assess each and every word. That practical criticism, I will discuss you tomorrow, perhaps for half an hour. I'll take up a poem and I'll analyze it. Then how you're going to write. Some of you are asking, sir, please explain about three unities. The three unities are unities of time, the place, and action. I just spoke extensively on that concept, and that's fine. And the practical criticism I'll teach you in my further class. And after that, you have a modern literary concept called deconstruction. Deconstruction, in the sense like how you're going to deconstruct literary text by your own interpretation. To tell it in a nutshell, what Roland Barthes says, that it is a writerly text. It is not a writerly text. It's a readerly text. The moment the reader born, the writer die. So because the everyone, the reader, they are the one who are the real critic. So deconstruction, in the sense like putting your own interpretation, putting your interpretation, and giving it a logical nexus to it. And after that, you have feminist theories and the contemporary concept called modernism and postmodernism and psychoanalysis theories and you have a post-colonial theory and psychoanalytical criticism and all that, analysis and all that. You have a Freud, Lacan, and the study materials is given extensively to make use of that. And I suggest you in this 1 hour, I try to give you the entire literary theory of criticism paper in a nutshell, and hope you understood the concept. And this is a little tough paper where you need to, in a body and soul, completely involve yourself and understand with the utmost care and concern and with the concentration. So the entire session was on the politics, and then threw a light on the rest of the concept. And I wish you good luck to people. And so far, the three texts were covered. And tomorrow, I'll take up the further text. Okay, possible a poem, otherwise critical criticism, other one, Old Man the Sea, and the further text tomorrow. Okay, and wish you good luck and see you tomorrow. And attend all classes without fail, and you will be benefited from the classes. So wish you good luck and see you tomorrow at the same time at 10:30 to 11:30. Okay. Bye. I'm going to leave the studio. Any question, the query that you have, you can always put a call to me and make a call and clarify your doubts. Okay. See you then. Then have a good day.